The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. A robust industrial property sector is vital to the economy. According to a Metro Vancouver study, industrial lands serve various purposes, such as warehousing, manufacturing, and supporting emerging technology businesses. They provide essential employment opportunities and continue to contribute to supply chains. In other words, they are vital to economic growth. Here's the challenge, says Todd Yuen of Beddie Industrial. There's a critical shortage of industrial lands in Metro Vancouver, and we're losing businesses and their employees to Alberta and other jurisdictions. The reasons for the shortages are complex. According to the InterVISTAS report, it says constrained land supply, complex jurisdictional overlaps, and a need to review the development process are causes of concern. Yuen says, to give you an example of the unmanageable permitting processes, we just put a new site on the market after 7 years of approvals. The wheels within the permitting process turn so slow they create an air of anti-progress. I invited Todd Yuen, the president of Beddie Industrial, to join me for a conversation that matters about the need to build industrial facilities, the impediments to doing so, and the consequences of inaction. Todd, welcome.
Thank you, Stu. Pleasure to be here.
Am I overstating it in that intro?
I wouldn't say you're overstating it. I think context is important there in that commentary.
So what context would you put this discussion into?
I think there's various layers of challenges that the industry is seeing on sites that are smaller in scale, zoned, entitled, serviced, ready to go. The process is reasonably efficient. They're handled by the municipalities in general. The staff of these municipalities, I think at the localized level, are in general quite committed to progress, and that's usually driven quite prominently by mayor and council with respect to their commitment to economic growth. So it's easier there. Is it simple? No, but it's easier. I think where we run into roadblocks and what the province needs is major moves that actually move the needle with respect to getting industrial lands to market. And on larger scale sites where your approvals start to bring in regulatory approvals to the province, I think that's where we start to see the bumps and where we see the challenges.
So if we take a look at those smaller, easier to develop sites, that's not going to move the needle for us as far as encouraging or building economic growth.
Correct.
What size of a project are we then talking about here so that people who are viewing can get a sense of what the scale of these projects would be?
Well, I think when we look at the industrial market, if you look at the studies that have been done, like the InterVISTAS studies you referenced, I think there is a commitment, and Metro Vancouver did their own study. The industrial market as a whole, whether it's a 10,000 square foot user or a 500,000 square foot user, the job generation there from an SME, small to medium-sized enterprise, to a major international corporation is extremely relevant to the statistics of the economy. The job generations out of those businesses in the industrial sector outpaces pretty much every industry that we have in the Canadian economy. So, you can have a 10,000 square foot industrial unit in an area like Richmond or Burnaby. There could be 20, 30, 50 employees within that. Similarly, you can get a 400,000 square foot warehouse that, at peak moments can employ thousands of employees. So, but when you look at the scale, when you look at the things that are really moving the needle in the economy today, the businesses that really drive the Canadian economy on a larger scale, whether it's a Canadian business or otherwise, these businesses are now operating at such scale that you need sites of 10, 20, 30, 50 acres at a time. And those are very difficult to find right now.
How difficult? And where would you even look within the greater Vancouver metro area?
So you have to look really hard. Like the one you mentioned in the introduction is a site that was in Delta. It was an old fill site historically, and that is the one. I think 7 years is probably a bit generous. It
was longer?
I believe like tip to tail, and I'd have to check with our team about that, but I think the actual entitlement and approvals process took longer. One of the things that we had to do, and I think the city of Delta was quite right to ask us of this, but at inception, we had no thought that we were going to have to build a major overpass over the highway. And this is the first time a private developer has been made to undertake an ask like that. But that is the types of things that developers of our scale are now being asked to look at just to make sites like this viable. So it just kind of talks about the challenges that we face as an industry in order just to get this product to market.
So how do you envision even building out a project like that if the approval process is so long and the elements within it keep shifting?
And I think that is whether you're in the residential sector, whether you're in the retail sector or in the industrial sector, I think this is the major area of concern for our industry right now. And the message that we've been trying to drive to policymakers, both at the local and the provincial level, is we're a business. Our goal is to deliver products and hopefully make a profit. And profit making, or even any form of reasonable revenue generation, is made almost impossible if we can't figure out how long it's going to take us. And that is the comment that we've made, is that ideally, every industrial real estate developer should not need to be Ryan Beddie in order to be successful. You shouldn't need that level of scale if you're competent and capable to bring a project forward. But the risks involved in this business right now are so significant. It's a real barrier to entry, and ultimately that translates to it's more difficult for everyone to bring product to market, which drives a higher end cost for our end customers, which is a detriment to the economy at the end of the day.
What is the cost of bringing a site like this one in Delta through to fruition?
Hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think what the message that we would deliver, let's be honest. I don't think that anyone would look at the owner of our business or the owner of any major real estate company and say they're hard done by. And I made that comment to a group of mayors the other day. We're not asking anyone to feel sorry for us. But the reality is, when you look at a project like the one we just did in Delta, if you look at that overpass that we were asked to do, when we originally budgeted that overpass, that number from the original budgeting to where we are today has more than doubled. And that number is approaching a 9-figure number for the overpass alone, right? That's a bit exaggerated, but not by much. And when you look at those costs and what it takes, and all those monies are spent upfront before there's any revenue generation out of the project whatsoever, it is a huge roll of the dice. And you're banking on continued improvements in the market. You're banking that you're not going to see the type of macroeconomic factors that we're facing right now, like tariffs, our good friends across the south of the border, an anti-trade sentiment, protectionism. All of those things ultimately impact our industry, but you can't stop. Once you're in, and you either keep going or you fold like a tent.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. In the industrial land sector, though, you go, okay, you've identified the property, you've decided you're going to do it, but you're looking at 7 or 8 years out. How do you find the potential tenants that you need to justify the pro forma on a piece of property like that?
You can't. So
it's on an act of faith.
It's on an act of faith. You are hoping and praying, and then it's even more minute than that, Stu, because as a developer of our scale dealing with the types of tenants that we're dealing with, the key is certainty, right? When you say to a Fortune 50 company, I'm going to deliver this building for you in June of 2028, the expectation is that building will be delivered in June of 2028. That means that in 2025, when that process starts, you have to be right. So what that meant for our development out in Delta is we weren't even willing to entertain discussions with potential clients until we had delivery certainty. So it was pushed off to the latest possible date because reputationally and just from a transactional perspective, you can't be wrong because it just doesn't work. The clients will not expect that. They expect delivery on the date you say you're going to be there. So you don't have the ability to say to a bank, don't worry about this. I've landed X company and they're going to pay us X rent a year, so go ahead and please lend us this money for servicing and entitlements and site works. You're saying, please trust us. This is going to work out at the end of the day.
And that argument doesn't go over so well.
It goes over if you're a business like ours and several others within the industry that have a proven track record, if you've shown that you have the experience. And I mean, the nice thing that we have in Metro Vancouver is it's kind of a double-edged sword. This scarcity means that there is typically a reasonable level of demand when you finally come out with your product. And scarcity typically means that your land prices should continue to appreciate at a reasonable level over time.
Let's compare Vancouver to other jurisdictions in the process.
Sure.
I went online and I was looking at a couple of American jurisdictions that boast about the speed with which they can bring industrial projects to fruition.
Yep.
How do we compare?
We don't. It's
not at all.
It's not even close. I mean, if you're in Vancouver, you're here because it's a port region. You have to have some sort of West Coast Canadian presence. You're taking advantage of our port facilities. It's strategic to your overall logistics chain. You're servicing homes or businesses in Vancouver. But I've lost count of the number of times, particularly from the US. A US real estate director will come into town, and the first question that they will ask me is, what incentives are being provided by your local or regional governments to incentivize businesses like ours to come here, invest, and build jobs? And my answer is really simple. Nothing.
Nothing.
Zero.
But the competition in other jurisdictions?
In Canadian jurisdictions, they don't exist. It's a Canadian reality that there are very few, if any, that at least that I'm aware of, that are prepared to incentivize. And it's, how do I say this? It's a very Canadian attitude. Is how can we do something for one that we're not prepared to do for everybody? So it's, it was actually mentioned to me, there was a business in a region of the Fraser Valley. This business exports the majority of their goods to the United States. They employ well over 300 people within the municipality that they're located, which in that municipality is a huge number of jobs. But with these recent tariffs, they were exploring moving to the United States because it would be far easier for them as far as the tariff impact, getting their goods across the border, all of those types of things. And I think ultimately from a taxation perspective, they'd probably make net more money. And so they've been poking around there. So they called us up because we have a site in their region, and they said, look, we'd love to stay here. We're from this market. This is where we grew up, but we can't afford to do this. So how can we stay here? Is there an incentive that will allow us? And they weren't even asking for dollar-to-dollar parity. They were saying, can you level the playing field so that it's not such an easy decision for us to move to the United States? So I, being proactive and positive thinking, I phoned up the economic director of that specific region. I said, what can we do there? And they're like, we can't, because we've attracted all of these businesses historically who've come to this market. They've been here without that. And how would we look all of these other businesses in the eye and tell them, well, we've done it for you, for this group, but we can't do it for the other group? And so I can talk out of both sides of my mouth on this. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of operating in Canada.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. I hear stories of people, British Columbia companies, who run into this. They seek out meetings with elected officials and bureaucrats, and they don't get the meeting. They make a phone call into the United States, even on a Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
The phone gets answered.
That's right.
And within a year, they're operational.
Yes.
And here, they can't even get a meeting.
Yes.
Do you feel that there is a bit of a mindset that says, we don't actually have to compete because people want to come here, and so we're not going out of our way to make accommodations for businesses?
I don't feel that. I mean, I've never historically been a supporter of our current provincial government. But that being said, and I'll say it publicly, it is impossible to meet an individual like Ravi Kahlon and say to yourself, he doesn't care.
No, I agree with you.
He's
he
not
does
interested.
Care. Yeah.
I think there are a lot of cabinet members and MLAs of his ilk who have the best interests of the economy, and they want better for this province. I think the challenge, and this kind of relates back directly, Stu, to what we're seeing, I think the challenge is where the rubber hits the road, right? Minister Kalon can have the best intentions at heart, but where the rubber hits the road at the province is at the bureaucracy and at the civil servant level of the implementation of these policies. And I think they look at the system in place right now and they're like, to change the system to allow an incentive-like program to attract more business, you got to pick what fish you're going to fry. And I think that's just such a Herculean effort that it would take to get all of the politics on side. I think the reality is that this is just too much.
Do you think it's complicated by the fact that there are so many jurisdictions within Metro Vancouver?
I don't think so, because I think when most of the mayors that I've met, I think they're quite pragmatic and business-minded, and I think they would understand right away the benefit of having the latitude to provide incentives. Because I don't know a mayor out there that if you found the right company that had the right brand reputation, that had the right ethics and alignment, that said, I'm going to bring 1,000 jobs to your city, but I need a little bit of a break on my property taxes, or I need a tax incentive at the corporate level, I'm sure every one of those mayors would want to try to find a way to land those guys.
Well, I'm sure they would, and they must be frustrated because you can take a look at large industrial projects that do get those incentives and get the boost to attract that business.
Yes.
And so it would make sense that at the more local level and smaller scale, even though we're talking about significant incomes, that there would be a benefit. And so it must be frustrating when you're saying, okay. So what then encourages you to continue to be able to say, we're going to continue to invest and do business in British Columbia when there are, like you have capital. Capital can move easily. What keeps you here?
Well, I mean, we are now a national company. We have offices in Toronto. We have offices in Calgary. We're active now in the United States. But I think if my boss, Ryan Beddie, was here, he would tell you this is home, right? This is a place we're committed to. It's where he grew up. It's where I grew up. And, you know, Ryan is in particular very committed to the BC economy and to the growth of it. And I think the reality is that we remember that while it would be nice to have a few more arrows in our quiver to attract some of these businesses, our industrial market has historically been and still continues to be very robust. You know, for the properties that we have available, there still remains a fairly strong level of demand that hasn't required or necessitated further incentives for us to get those big companies, because all of the things that people say about the Northwest region, Vancouver, you know, we are a gateway to a lot of places. We have an incredible port facility. It's critical to the supply chains of most of the major companies in the world, and that's recognized. And if you're going to come into the West Coast, if you're bringing in containers from Asia or around the world, you're picking one of several spots along that West Coast, and Vancouver is one of them, and we're a beneficiary to that.
So what concerns me, though, is we know that the BC economy needs a boost. And one of the surefire ways of doing that is to create greater economic activity by building the facilities that allow the companies that occupy these industrial facilities that you're building to get to market quicker.
Yes.
They will provide good paying jobs. And if we are still kind of dragging our feet, despite the fact that we're looking at the challenges that the tariffs of the United States are posing, if we're still dragging our feet, what risk do we run that, yes, Vancouver looks attractive, but so does Calgary? And, you know, and in cases, as you say, so does Seattle or Bellingham or, you know, somewhere else in Washington State.
We were chasing entitlements for a site that took us well over 2 to 3 years just to get approved by Metro Vancouver and various other jurisdictions to become industrial. And as part of that process, we brought in front of the Metro Vancouver board several businesses who actually were stymied by their ability to grow. You know, one of these businesses was in the furniture industry. They were located in the Fraser Valley. You know, hundreds of employees looking to double from 80,000 feet to 150,000 feet, which is significant. And they ultimately ended up going to Bellingham just because they couldn't find what they wanted to do here. You know, one of our tenants ended up moving into Calgary because they wanted to own their facility, and the cost of ownership there was half. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, Stu, is that the time and the effort and the cost it takes us to get these properties to market, you know, as I mentioned before, it ultimately just shows up in the bottom line number that I have to produce. When we have to carry a piece of property for 7 years and our cost to service and to entitle double or go up by 2.5 times, that ultimately just shows up in the end number at the end of the day. And it means those are businesses that I can't attract to our lands because the timelines are just, as we mentioned, they're so impenetrable for the first 5 or 6 years because you can't commit until you know. So that is a real risk of the challenge that we've got right now in our market.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. So you're deep inside this process. You work with many different jurisdictions. What would you like to see as a number of smaller changes that could maybe just expedite the process enough that it goes from 7 to 5.5 years? Because every little bit counts. Are there 4 or 5 things that you go, it would be fabulous if we could address some of these issues?
Well, I think the first, if I go from easiest to probably most challenging, the one issue that we run into quite consistently, and less so now that there's obviously been a clear slowdown in the market, particularly on the residential side, but historically one of the biggest issues has been staffing challenges at the municipal level, right? Is there's parity, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert on the labor side within the municipalities. You might have more data than I have, but there isn't a huge amount of competitiveness or ability for the municipalities to balance their pay scales for a plan checker or for an individual looking at building permit submissions so that they can compete with private industry. So, they have historically struggled with this. There's been a lot of turnover with the municipalities, and it is very difficult to pound your fist on the desk in front of the individual who's responsible for getting your BP submission in, and that individual is saying, I've got 30 of these on my desk that I can't get to, and everyone is yelling at me. And you kind of have to sit there. You're inhuman if you say, well, I don't care, like move mine up, right? It's just, that's not the way the world works. Right. So that's the biggest issue. We have offered as a business, as I know many of our colleagues have in the industry, we said, we'll pay the overtime, right? We'll do what it takes in order to, charge me a $50,000 fee to administer through this process so you can afford to pay overtime. But within the system that exists right now, that's verboten. They can't do those types of things. So there's that quagmire that has historically been the system, but I will again note that that is less of an issue now. Permits are still moving forward at a reasonable rate. I think where things get more complex, but where the rubber hits the road is, again, at the municipal level, things aren't that bad, right? It's you can call the mayor, you can call a councillor, you can get a hold of a city manager, you will get a call back, right? Because there is that level of engagement, because these are people who live and work within our community. Where we found, at least within our business, the real challenges that have been, and I've spoken to several people in the province about this, it's at the provincial level. It's getting your Water Sustainability Act approval. It's dealing with, the ministry that administers the Water Sustainability Act. It's getting your historical artifacts permits. Those are the areas where we've been more challenged. And as I mentioned on a panel the other day, to deal with that requires systemic change. And I am not qualified to figure out how a institutional body like the government is going to make the level of systemic change that I would say would be needed in order to see a real result.
Well, the only way that I think that change happens is if there's the will.
That's right.
And I think the only way that will becomes apparent is if it becomes a political imperative.
Yes.
If voters are saying, you're not supporting the industries that we need to thrive. It's a complex situation.
Well, what's interesting in that, in some of the very heated discussions that I've been involved with deputy ministers and ADMs, is the Premier has made it clear that the increase in supply of industrial lands is a provincial priority. Our project in Delta at 7 years plus was identified as a priority project for the province by Premier Eby. And we use that as a hammer in many conversations to say, how is this the treatment we're getting if this is supposed to be a priority project? And so, from the highest levels of the provincial government, the need for industrial lands has been identified. This is not a secret, right? It's interesting. 30 years ago, no one even talked about industrial lands, but now it's on the tips of everyone's tongue. But that message has to get through to the rank and file, right? Like it's great if the Premier knows that. It's wonderful that the deputy minister and the ADM identify that. But if the people processing our applications are not embracing that imperative, then we just get stuck. And the system is so big, Stu, that it is very easy for even an organization as large as ours for us to get whipped around in the cyclone for years and years and years, because if someone decides for whatever reason they don't like our project or they don't like our application, or that from a personal perspective this isn't something that they want to pursue, they don't like industrial lands, no more warehouses, we want more green space, there is a way under the current regime for that to be slowed down, and we've been victim to it.
Very unfortunate to hear that, and it's an unfortunate note to end on, but thank you for letting us see inside the complex world of industrial building development and industrial lands.
Thank you for having me here.